Hello again. So today's video is about the Esterbrook Journaler nib. The Esterbrook has been one of my favorite new pens that I've acquired. I purchased the medium size nib, which is my go-to nib, but I have been leaning more towards flex nibs and a few fine nibs, but I usually always try a medium first because I like a wider nib. And this one is really smooth and fun to use. I haven't had any issues with it. It isn't a hard start or anything, and I love it. I do not know much about nib grinds, and I've never had any other custom nibs before, but I was really intrigued by the Journaler nib, and it really made me want to try it out for myself. I feel really silly just because I tend to get really attached to my pens and the way they write with the original nibs that I purchase. And I've only ever had to replace a nib on my Kaweco like twice, but only because they were fine nibs and I really wanted medium nibs in those pens. I have yet to try out a fine nib in the Esterbrook. However, I think I would probably enjoy that one as well, just seeing as how wide the medium nib is, meaning that there is room for me to go down a size and still have kind of like the width of a nib that I would appreciate. But like I mentioned before, I have started, leaning more towards a fine nib just depending on the pen. My vintage Schaefer is a fine nib and it just writes so beautifully and I really enjoy using it. And then I do have a few Kaweco Sports that are medium-sized nibs, but they are really thin, so they, to me, would write more like a fine nib. I'm not familiar with all the nib terms, but the Journaler nib is, to my understanding, more of a stub nib. I think it writes really well. However, I think I prefer the medium nib a lot more. So I don't know if stub nibs are my cup of tea. I feel as though the lines are much more, I don't know if stub really explains it for me, but I see it as more of like a boxy kind of writing. I, again, don't know all the terms of stub versus like italic versus Aardekker versus all these other style of nibs. I'm not familiar with them. I did see other people's videos explaining the Journaler nib and how the nib grinder from Esterbrook is mimicking a vintage Esterbrook nib. I think it's a beautiful nib. I think I prefer the more rounded curve of the medium nib compared to the more, I don't know, to me it looks boxy, but I could be wrong. For me, some of the lettering kind of comes out more boxy. I don't know how to really explain it, but I think I prefer the medium-sized nib a lot more. I'll make sure to link the videos I watched about this nib, so that way you have more facts and knowledge about it. But it did make me want to try it out and see how it differs from a medium-sized nib. But like I mentioned, I've never even really tried a stub nib before, so I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I was really fascinated by the name of the nib and I really wanted to try it out. I also really love the Esterbrook fountain pen to begin with. Like I said, it is one of my favorites that I've recently purchased. There is an attachment that you can purchase that allows you to use vintage Esterbrook nibs with your new pen body, which I think is just such an interesting idea. So if I ever come across a vintage Esterbrook nib, I, would be able to use it provided I get that attachment. I'm assuming it's the feed attachment too. I'm not too certain, but I do know that you can use vintage nibs with the Esterbrook. I don't know. This really sparked my interest. I really wanted to try it out for myself. And even though it's not my favorite nib, I was happy that I could actually, see for myself how it writes. And it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. But for some reason, I just prefer the medium nib. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you've tried the Journaler nib or any custom nib, well, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.